Imagine building so many additions onto a house that the original house becomes completely hidden inside. Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to This House. Today we are exploring Aladdin's palace in Washington, D.C. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. Originally, the Galt family built this home in 1976 to be a stately and modest Washington, D.C. residence. But that would soon change. 4 years after its construction, they sold it to Gardner Green Hubbard, who was the first president of National Geographic and the co-founder of the Bell Telephone Company. When the Hubbards purchased the house, they made it their own by adding rooms and reworking the facade to better unify the house's exterior. When Mr. Hubbard passed away in 1897, he left the home to his daughter Mabel and her husband Alexander Graham Bell, the other co-founder of the Bell Telephone Company. They held on to the house until 1907, when they sold it to the whiskey baron Edson Bradley Jr. for $166,500, or the modern-day equivalent of over $5 million. Bradley had purchased the home with the intention of demolishing it, but after submitting plans to the city, he was informed that if he did so, he would only be allowed to build a smaller house that conformed to the new zoning regulations of Washington, D.C. He hired architect Howard Greenlee to rework the existing house and add more space. Greenlee was able to make sense of the new zoning regulations and designed a series of additions that would double the size of the house. He drew upon 16th century English design as his inspiration and incorporated elements of French Renaissance styling throughout the home. The house would be laid out in two sections, the servants in one wing and the family in another. The two sections of the house would be separated by a driveway on the first floor and joined on the second floor by a gallery. The entire renovation would expand the house to consume half of a city block with over 40 rooms, at a total cost of $100,000, or the modern-day equivalent of over $3 million. Entering the house, you would pass through giant iron doors and walk into the vestibule. The walls were wainscoted with old-growth Italian walnut. Below this were marble floors surrounding a centered tile mosaic. The ceiling boasted intricate relief work which had been gold-leafed. We can imagine the golden glow of the room as the ceiling reflected off the polished marble floors. Continuing up a short flight of stairs, you would arrive in the stair hall. Solomonic columns twisted from the balustrade to form arches below the ceiling reliefs. Here you can see the grand stairs receding behind one of the arches and the opening to the east gallery. Traveling through the opening, the east gallery extended 60 feet deep with a width of 18 feet. The ceiling was modeled after a Roman atrium and soared above the wooden Egyptian tiled floor. This gallery was filled with antique furniture, vases, and tapestries. There were many other grand rooms in this palace, including the porcelain room. The walls were crafted from green silk, and the mantel of the Italian Renaissance fireplace was supported by angels carved from stone. The ceiling had been fauxed to create a more rustic aesthetic. The wood beams and panels were charred before receiving an acid wash. Then they were painted with watercolors to give the illusion that they were several centuries old. The cabinets contained the Bradleys' prized collection of porcelains, most of which were in rose and peach tones, adding a lively accent to an otherwise earth-toned room. The dining room was assembled from oak panels with colorful tapestries decorating the walls. The plaster ceiling boasted a custom geometric tracery pattern. A fireplace was centered in the bay window, allowing light to flood into the space. Continuing on through an opening in the dining room, you would arrive in the west gallery, which extended over the driveway. It was decorated with rich green velvets and contained the rare Virgin and Child by Verrocchio. The music room contained the Bradleys' collection of antique instruments. Every architectural feature of the room was white, with the only color coming from decorations and furniture. Pilasters flanked the walls in set intervals with tapestries hung between them. The ceiling was barrel vaulted with identical reliefs carved into each section. At the far end of the music room, set behind an arched opening, was the grand fireplace with reliefs of maidens both above and below the hearth, and topped with cherubs sitting above the pediment. A giant living room, measuring 90 feet by 120 feet, had been added to the southern wall of the mansion to allow more space for displaying the Bradleys' works of art and to double as an in-home theater. The living room was 3 stories tall and was said to have been an exact replica of a grand hall they had seen in an English castle. The walls were clad with walnut panels with contrasting oak trim sweeping around the room. The visual anchor of the room was a massive stone fireplace. Details abounded throughout the house, with no surface left lacking ornamentation. Walking into the oratory, you would have passed through a large pointed Gothic arch, finished out with bricks and being surrounded by carved stone. The ceiling of the oratory was geometrically offset with several layers of molding, creating within it sections for murals to be painted. At the far end of the oratory was an altar and a pipe organ, above which 3 stained glass windows were installed. Leading up to 1920, Mr. Bradley had been lobbying against the growing cries for prohibition. He knew that if this was to become law, his whiskey empire would crumble. So when the law was passed, he left Washington, D.C. and bought a house in Newport by the name of Seaview Terrace. They sold Aladdin's palace for $700,000, or the modern-day equivalent of over $10 million. The Bradleys missed their home in D.C. dearly, but fortunately, they were able to repurchase it again a few years later. But not to live in. They hired their architect, Howard Greenlee, to systematically disassemble the interior of Aladdin's palace and reconfigure it inside of Seaview Terrace. The facade of Aladdin's palace was now the only piece of the home that stood at the site. The entire interior had been saved and transported to their new house. The Bradleys sold the shell of Aladdin's palace in 1926. It was then demolished to make way for the DuPont Circle building, which continues to occupy the lot to this day. Thank you all for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. While you're at it, head over to our merch shop to pick up a This House reusable water bottle to take with you on the go. I would also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to our This House supporters whose names you can see on screen right now. If you would like to contribute to our production, please consider joining our membership program for $5 per month. It will help us reach our goals and you will see your name credited on the screen in future videos. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time on This House.